You should have stayed dead!
The next Transformers movie is definitely something to get excited about, especially with the big twist teased at the end of Rise of the Beasts. But even though a crossover with G.I. Joe sounds cool on paper, it might not be the smartest move for the future of the franchise. When you think about how big Transformers has been over the years, especially at the box office, it makes sense that the studio wants to keep the momentum going. But the numbers haven't been nearly as strong lately, and that's where things start to get tricky. Let's rewind a bit. The live-action Transformers universe kicked off in 2007 with Michael Bay at the helm, and his movies were box office giants. Two of them made over $1 billion each worldwide, which is no small feat. Even the less well-received entries still pulled in hundreds of millions. Bay's visual style and explosive action pretty much shaped what people expected from a Transformers movie, for better or worse. But since Bay stepped away after Transformers: The Last Knight in 2017, the franchise has been trying to figure out what comes next. There's been a clear shift in tone and style since then, and 2018's Bumblebee was a good example of that change. It leaned into character and emotion more than Bay's entries did, and although it didn't make as much money, it was well received by critics and fans. Fast forward to 2023, and Rise of the Beasts tried to take things a step further by setting up a shared universe, hinting at a massive crossover between Transformers and G.I. Joe. On the surface, that sounds like a fun idea, but considering how much the franchise has been struggling to regain its identity, maybe now isn't the time for a big team-up. When you take a closer look at how the Transformers films have performed since Bay left, the numbers tell a pretty clear story. Bumblebee made around $465 million, and Rise of the Beasts brought in even less at roughly $439 million. While those figures are impressive for many franchises, Transformers has always operated on a different level, one where expectations are much higher. So even though both of those movies were profitable, it's obvious that the franchise isn't pulling the same weight it used to. That makes a risky crossover feel a bit premature. And that's just the financial side. Creatively, the Transformers series has been stuck in a bit of an identity crisis since Bay's departure. His movies had a very specific look and tone, flashy, action-packed, and centered around human characters just as much as the robots. After he stepped away, the new movies tried to move in a different direction, but not far enough to really feel like a reboot. As a result, the newer films still feel like they're standing in Bay's shadow, rather than breaking into fresh territory. Because of that, a crossover with G.I. Joe, another franchise with its own ups and downs, feels like the wrong move right now. The Transformers movies need to finish establishing their own new voice first. Right now, it feels like the franchise is in transition, trying to discover what kind of stories it wants to tell and how it wants to tell them. Jumping into a crossover adds another layer of complexity before that foundation is even fully set. Another thing to keep in mind is that we really don't know anything about this crossover yet. Ever since Rise of the Beasts teased the connection to G.I. Joe, there's been radio silence. No plot details, no casting announcements, no big creative reveals, nothing. For a franchise as big as Transformers, you'd expect a lot more buzz by now if something major was on the way. That lack of information isn't necessarily a bad sign, but it doesn't exactly build confidence either. What makes this even more complicated is the critical reception. Bumblebee was generally praised and gave fans hope that the franchise was evolving, but Rise of the Beasts didn't land as well with critics. It had some fun moments, but it didn't shake things up in any major way. So when the biggest headline coming out of the film was a crossover tease rather than the story itself, that says something. It suggests the filmmakers are looking for ways to generate excitement outside of the core Transformers narrative, which might not be the best long-term strategy. Another concern is how this crossover could further confuse the already tangled Transformers timeline. Even longtime fans have a hard time figuring out how all the films connect. Some are prequels, some seem like reboots, and others sort of float somewhere in between. Adding G.I. Joe into the mix might just make things more chaotic. And considering how both franchises have juggled continuity in the past, this could end up alienating more viewers than it draws in. Still, there's a lot of untapped potential in the Transformers universe, especially if the films lean into the deeper mythology. That's where the upcoming animated movie comes in. Instead of focusing on Earth-based battles or human drama, this film is expected to explore the origins of the Transformers themselves. It's set to dive into the rich lore of Cybertron, which could help reshape the franchise's direction. The Transformers are a fascinating blend of robot and alien, with a backstory rooted in cosmic conflict. They're not just machines, they're sentient beings from Cybertron, a planet filled with ancient secrets and complex history. Some versions of the lore, like the classic 1980s cartoon, explain that these robots were created by a strange, multi-faced race called the Quintessons. These alien overlords use Cybertron as a massive factory, churning out two main types of robots, soldiers and consumer goods, but they treated their creations poorly, constantly breaking them down and reusing their parts. Over time, though, the robots began to change. They started to think for themselves, develop emotions, and even question their creators. Eventually, they rose up and overthrew the Quintessons, claiming Cybertron for themselves. That rebellion led to the birth of the Autobots and Decepticons, two factions with very different visions for the future. The Autobots, who originally came from the consumer-class robots, wanted peace and progress. To give themselves an edge in battle, they developed the ability to transform, which made them more adaptable in combat. The Decepticons, on the other hand, came from the military class. They weren't about to let the Autobots gain the upper hand, so they learned to transform too. And just like that, the endless war between the two sides began. That's one version of the Transformers' origin, but there's another take from the comics that's even more epic. In this version, Cybertron wasn't built at all. It was actually the body of a godlike being named Primus. He was created to fight another ancient force of destruction, Unicron, a planet-sized monster that devours worlds. The battle between these two beings lasted for ages, and eventually, both were trapped in a dormant state. Primus became Cybertron, and from him, the Transformers were born. Their purpose? To defend the universe from chaos and destruction. Whichever origin story the franchise leans into, it's clear there's a lot of depth to explore, and an animated movie focusing on that cosmic history could help reset the tone for the entire franchise. Until then, it might be best to let Optimus Prime and his crew stand on their own, at least for a little while longer. And that's that for today's video. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.